I had never told my son, Mateo, about my true salary. For years, the boy only saw me living in a modest apartment in Little Havana, Miami, wearing worn-out shoes, always carrying an old tote bag, cooking simple meals with hands still trembling after a long day at the office. To him, I was just Marcel Rivera, a Latino mother working for some charity organization, earning a modest wage and nothing more. But the truth was different, completely different. I had been the executive director of an international nonprofit organization for almost 2 decades. The organization operated in more than 12 countries, with an annual budget of hundreds of millions of dollars, coordinating with governments, the United Nations, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education. I signed contracts so large that some politicians had to consult me before making decisions. My salary? $60,000 a month. But I lived simply. I lived quietly. I belonged to a generation of Latino women who believed real value lay in resilience, not in ostentation. I chose silence because I wanted Mateo to grow on his own terms, not become a child who relied on his mother, not be blinded by money. I did not tell him, and he did not ask. Until the day of his own wedding. The day I saw things I had never wanted to see. The day my silence became a knife that allowed others to belittle me as if I were nothing. Before I tell you, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Subscribe if you've ever felt slighted, because the story I'm about to tell will change the way you look at a wedding, a family. Mateo had never spoken to me in that tone. My son, the little boy who once ran after me through the blazing streets of Little Havana, the child I carried on my hip whenever I worked night shifts, now spoke to me with the voice of a man afraid of being judged. Mommy, I just want everything to be perfect. Camilla's family, they are a bit demanding. They are used to luxury. They want the pre-wedding party to be very polished. You just need to dress simply, okay? I smiled gently. You know, I have nothing but simplicity. Mateo was silent, a silence that did not feel comfortable, a silence that told me my son was trying to hide something. I asked, do they know what I do for a living yet? No. I only told them you work in an office, a modest job. You know, Europeans tend to compare. I sighed. I understood then. It was not Camilla's family who was judging me. It was Mateo who feared they would judge me. Nothing hurts more than realizing your child is afraid you will embarrass him. But instead of anger, I felt my heart grow cold, so cold that for a moment, I could hear my heartbeat slow down. I was not angry at Mateo. I was angry at myself. Angry because I had hidden things so well that he believed his mother was lower than everyone else. After the call, I looked around the small apartment where I had deliberately maintained simplicity to raise Mateo with values instead of money. But perhaps, to the eyes of a young adult, simplicity could be easily mistaken for poverty. I stood in front of the mirror, a 58-year-old Latino woman, gray streaks tucked behind her ears, eyes seasoned but warm. I saw myself, and I wondered, if my son was ashamed of his mother's simplicity, how would others treat me when they believed I had nothing? The answer came quickly. I needed to know the truth. And the only way to see someone's true nature was to let them think you were weaker than they were. I chose my oldest dress, a pale beige one that was slightly loose and slightly wrinkled. I tied my hair carelessly, wore no makeup, no jewelry. I wanted to walk into their luxurious world looking exactly like the insignificant woman they imagined me to be. Not for revenge, but to observe. And as I pulled the zipper up on that dress, I felt something vague yet unmistakable. Tonight would not be like any other night in my life. I did not know what would happen, but I knew one thing for certain. It would change everything. I stepped out of the apartment, called a taxi, and as the car drove along Collins Avenue toward the hotel hosting the pre-wedding party, I watched the city lights reflected against the window and realized that every word from that afternoon's call was only the beginning of a night when my dignity would be tested and the people I was about to meet would reveal their true selves more clearly than ever. And at the moment, I pushed open the doors to the banquet hall. The moment I stepped into the banquet hall at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, everything seemed to pause for a second. The warm light from crystal chandeliers soaring up to the ceiling shimmered across the glossy marble floor. The air carried a faint scent of white orchids. A violin ensemble was playing an old French piece that made the scene look like a royal family reception, not the pre-wedding party of a young Latino French couple. But what made me stop was not the luxury. It was the eyes. Mateo was the first to see me. The smile on his face slowly faded. He looked at the old dress I was wearing, the shoes with worn soles, then glanced around as if afraid others would notice. In my son's eyes, the boy I raised with tears, and the days I had to run to work because I could not afford to fix the car years ago, I saw embarrassment, discomfort, and an attempt to appear normal. He hurried over. "Mommy, you are here. I did not think you would wear that." I smiled softly, a smile that only made Mateo more uneasy. "I am only wearing what I have, hijo. Just like you said, simple." Mateo swallowed hard. He looked toward Camilla's family, and when I followed his gaze, I understood immediately why my son was afraid. The Devereaux family stood a few steps away, three people who looked as if they had walked out of a Paris fashion magazine. Isabel Devereaux, Camilla's mother, wore an embroidered teal satin gown with an emerald necklace expensive enough that anyone could tell it was custom made. Beside her was Laurent, Camilla's father, with the air of a haute bourgeois businessman, in a perfectly tailored black suit and neatly slicked back silver hair. And Elodie, Camilla's sister, in a champagne sequin dress, her eyeliner sharp as a blade. They did not say a word. They only looked. They looked at me from head to toe, at the old dress, at the worn shoes, at my loosely tied hair, at the faded tote bag as if it were an eyesore. Isabel was the first to speak, her French accent soft but dripping with arrogance. "Oh, Madame Rivera, you are here." There was no warmth, no genuine smile, only the feeling of someone forced to shake hands out of politeness. Camilla walked over and kissed my cheek quickly, too quickly for her lips to actually touch my skin. "Mother, I'm glad you came," she said softly, but her voice was tight, the kind that meant, "I am glad you are here, but please do not draw too much attention." Elodie stood behind her sister, tilting her head at me, as if assessing a dated object that had wandered onto a runway. Laurent extended his hand and shook mine weakly. "Bienvenue." Only one word, nothing more, no greeting, no smile in his eyes. Isabel looked at me for a long moment, then asked, "You came by taxi?" I nodded. "Many people in my neighborhood still take taxis. It is convenient." Isabel gave me a noble, pitying smile. "Oui, I understand. In France, we also have neighborhoods like that." It sounded harmless, but I understood. They believed my neighborhood, Little Havana, was a place for people who lacked means. A server passed by, and Isabel gestured lightly as if signaling a servant. "I will have another champagne, and bring Madame Rivera a glass of water. No ice." I laughed inwardly. They thought water suited someone like me better than champagne. Elodie whispered to Camilla in French, assuming I did not understand. "She is very simple." I stood still, smiling lightly, as if I heard nothing. But inside me, something was moving slowly and coldly, like the surface of the sea at night when a storm is about to form. Camila led me to the table and introduced me to a few friends from Lyon. When I sat down, nobody pulled out a chair for me. No one asked if I needed anything, no polite smiles. They spoke to each other in French. They laughed with one another. They talked about expensive hotels, business class flights, the jewelry shop they visited that morning in the design district. No one asked where I was from. No one asked what I did. No one asked if I was enjoying myself. I was simply an empty space in a chair at the end of the table. And that was when I realized. The Devereaux family did not just see me as inferior. They saw me as invisible. I sat quietly, watching Matteo look at me with worry, Camilla forcing polite smiles for her family, Isabel and Laurent radiating the confidence of the upper class. And I told myself, fine. If they want to believe I am poor, I will let them, until they can no longer breathe under the weight of their own mistake. The pre-wedding party had barely begun when I clearly sensed it. Every word, every smile, every glance from the Devereaux family was coated in a thin layer of European civility. But underneath was the cold point of a needle. Isabel sat across from me, lifted her champagne glass, and began speaking the way a professor lectures a weak student. "Miami is beautiful, especially this beach area. But where do you live again?" Matteo said. "A rather modest neighborhood," I replied softly. "Little Havana." Elodie laughed as if she had just heard the name of a slum on the outskirts of Paris. Isabel said, "Oh, interesting. In Lyon, we have similar areas too, places where immigrant laborers live." The French friends behind her nodded, looking as though they now fully understood I was simply working class. Laurent looked at me as if looking at someone in need of support. "The cost must be low there. You live alone, correct? I live well enough, and yes, alone." Laurent tilted his head, pretending to be sympathetic. Women living alone at your age? It is admirable, having to manage everything by yourself. Elodie cut in. But fortunately, you have Mateo, such a good man who takes care of his mother. A French woman having a husband like that is a blessing. I looked at Elodie. Her smile clearly said, "We raise our daughters, and you make your son carry you." Camilla said nothing. She did not defend me, not one word. She just stared into her champagne, as if wanting to hide inside it. Isabel placed her napkin down, palm turning slightly upward, her voice still soft, but full of danger. "Mateo said you work in a small office, administrative work." "Something like that," I answered simply, exactly as planned. Isabel let out a very light breath, the kind people release when something confirms their low expectations. "I am happy for you. At your age, having stable work is very good." That sentence pulled memories of all my years at the organization's headquarters in Geneva, then in Nairobi, then in Washington, D.C., meeting with ministers, signing contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. But now, in front of me, Isabel saw me as a file clerk. She believed it, and she thought she was right. Laurent followed his wife's lead, continuing the duet. "Simple work keeps the mind light. You do not have to worry about the heavy responsibilities we handle, running large enterprises. Sometimes, a simple life is a gift." I almost laughed. If he knew I managed more than his company ever would, he would choke. But I stayed silent. I let them keep digging the hole they did not know they were about to fall into. Elodie looked at my old tote bag. "You really brought this bag. It looks vintage." Isabel corrected her. "Not vintage. This is the type of bag Miami laborers use. Durable, cheap, practical." Their smiles began to look more and more alike. The smile of people who believe they stand on a higher level and have the right to judge anyone they consider beneath them. Then Isabel asked a question, soft as air. "Did you help Mateo with anything for the wedding? For example, a little financial support. In France, parents usually help with a rather generous amount." Elodie murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "But she probably does not have much to offer." Mateo heard it. His face paled. The boy I raised was standing there, unable to say a single word. I still smiled. "I helped, within my means." Isabel let out a polite laugh. "No, no. I mean, a significant amount. Enough for the two of them to start married life comfortably." Laurent added, "We have given Camilla a fairly large sum. You know, that is normal for families with means." And then that sentence slipped out of his mouth. But Mateo said, "You cannot contribute much. That is perfectly fine. No one can blame a person with limited income." Everything around me suddenly went silent. Or perhaps I simply stopped hearing anything. There is a kind of insult that requires no shouting, only a gentle tone like that. That is the deepest cut. I placed my glass of water down. I looked at Isabel. I looked at Laurent. I looked at Elodie. And at that moment, I knew, with certainty, their true faces were exposed completely. They saw me as poor, insignificant, uneducated, without status, a burden, a lesser mother. They believed it so firmly that, they did not notice Mateo clenching his fist, nor Camila sitting frozen, unable to meet my eyes, nor me breathing steadily as I prepared for a moment they could not possibly imagine. I was not angry. I felt only stillness, a frightening stillness, because they did not know that every word they spoke, every comment they delivered, was bringing them closer to the moment they would have to swallow all of it in front of the entire banquet hall. And that moment was near, very near. The French music still played in the distance, and the crystal lights continued to sparkle across the ceiling. Everything looked perfect, luxurious, extravagant. But no one in that room knew that at that very moment. I was being offered hush money like a parasite. Isabel stared at me for a long time, as if evaluating merchandise. Then she leaned in. The way she whispered was what made it frightening, soft, polite, but each word dripping like acid on the marble floor. Madame Rivera, I want to speak. Woman to woman. I looked straight at her. Isabel continued, Our family is well off, and we care about the stability of Camila and Mateo. I stayed silent, waiting for the next blade. Young people need their own space, she said. They need to build their life without distractions. Laurent stepped in, his voice filled with calculation. Especially when one family member does not have strong finances. I raised the corner of my mouth. I knew exactly who they were referring to. Isabel placed a hand on her chest, pretending kindness. So, we are willing to support you. Support? I asked. Elodie smiled as if her mother was about to propose something delightful. Isabel spoke plainly. We will send you an allowance of $1,500 a month, enough for you to live more comfortably without relying on Mateo. Laurent nodded. You will not need to worry about bills, about rent, about depending on your son. In return, he paused for 1 second. I heard every word. You. Limit your visits to the young couple. Limit interference. Limit your presence. I looked at them. I looked at each face. Isabel softened her tone. We are not asking you to disappear. It is just that families of different social classes can create tension, I asked. Different social classes. Isabel let out a breath that was almost a mocking breeze. We. In France, we are very straightforward. Our family belongs to the upper class, and you belong to a different class. Elodie continued in English, very clearly. It's better for everyone if you let Mateo live freely. Laurent nodded, as if he had just finalized a major economic decision. We pay. You keep your distance. Everyone benefits. I put my water glass down. I did not tremble. I was not shocked. I was not angry. I simply felt a strange calm rise within me, the calm of someone who knows it is time to flip the table. So, what you mean, I said slowly, is that you want to pay me to stay away from my own son. Isabel smiled. That sounds harsh. I call it a civilized solution. I tilted my head. Civilized. In our class, she said, we handle everything with money. Laurent emphasized. $1,500 a month. Do you agree? That is quite a generous amount. I looked at them. 3 people so confident they had no idea they had just crossed my final boundary. Then I said gently, "May I ask something?" All 3 responded at once. "Of course," I asked. "Do you truly believe I am so poor that I would live off $1,500 a month?" Isabel waved a hand lightly. "No one said you are poor. We simply understand your situation." I nodded. "Good," I said softly, "because tonight all of you will understand my situation more clearly than anyone." Elodie raised a brow. "What do you mean by that?" I looked directly at Isabel. "You will know soon." And right then, the host's voice rang out. "Will the families of the bride and groom please come to the stage? The speeches will begin." Isabel stood up and took Laurent's arm. As for me, I rose very slowly, very calmly, because I knew. The moment I held the microphone would be the moment they regretted every word they had said. I followed them to the stage, the light shining directly on me, shining on the old dress I wore, shining on the worn-down shoes, all the things that made them believe I was insignificant. But they did not know that when I lifted that microphone, every light in the room would shift. Every pair of eyes would turn toward them, and every polished mask they wore would fall away. When the host invited representatives of both families to step onto the stage to speak, I walked behind Isabel and Laurent, clearly sensing their cold confidence. They believed they were the center of the room. They believed they were the wealthiest people here. They believed I was nothing but background color. They did not know that in just a few minutes, everything they believed would collapse. Matteo was already standing beside the host with a strained smile. When I stepped up, his eyes fell on the old dress I was wearing, and I saw the worry in his face. Camilla did not look at me. Isabel stood tall, ready to perform her French aristocratic poise in front of Miami guests. Then the host handed me the microphone. The room went silent. The violins softened. The lights focused. I held the microphone with both hands, calm, slightly bowed, like a humble Latino woman preparing to say something lovely. But what I said was the exact opposite. I am Marisol Rivera, and perhaps today is the first time many people in this room will know who I actually am. The audience murmured. Isabel tilted her head slightly, sensing something was wrong. I looked directly at the Devereaux family and spoke slowly. For many years, I lived simply. I wore simple clothes. I used an old bag. I lived in a modest apartment in Little Havana, and I let my son believe his mother was just an ordinary office worker. I paused. But that is not the truth. Matteo lifted his head. Camilla turned to look at me. Isabel froze. I continued. I am not a secretary. I am not an administrative worker. I am not a woman without money, as someone assumed. The entire room held its breath. The truth is, I am the executive director of the international organization Human Bridge, an organization operating in 12 countries. I manage annual budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars, working directly with governments, the United Nations, and global institutions. Then I added, my voice steady, cold, and very clear. And my income is $60,000 a month. The banquet hall exploded, not with noise, but with a silence so shocked it felt suffocating. Isabel's eyes widened, her champagne glass frozen mid-air. Laurent leaned forward, as if unsure he had heard correctly. Elodie's mouth fell open. Mateo stood still like a 10-year-old boy being called to the front of the class. Camilla covered her mouth with her hand. I looked at them all and delivered the next sentence, the one that broke everything completely. And tonight, someone offered me $1,500 a month so that I would appear less often in my son's life. The room went dead silent. People began looking around, whispering, searching. They knew exactly who had made the offer. I did not need to say their names. I turned the microphone slightly in my hand and continued in a voice as light as air. I was offered a generous amount in exchange for silence, distance, and the humility they believed I should have, because they assumed I was poor. Isabel's face turned crimson. Laurent clenched his fist. Elodie looked away. I looked at them, not with anger, not with spite, simply with truth. But what they did not know is that I live simply not because I lack money. I live simply because I know real value is not something to be displayed. A pause, and they believed my worth was low, only because I did not dress like them. The banquet hall seemed to erupt with stares alone. No words, only the heavy weight of the moment. I lowered my voice. Someone told me I should know my place. Isabel narrowed her eyes, her hand trembling. I took a step toward the Devereaux table. And now, I want to make this clear. My place is not beneath anyone, and certainly not beneath people who believe money can buy the dignity of others. A woman at a back table let out a sharp breath. Someone clapped, then another, but I was not finished. I raised the microphone and let my voice drop lower. I am not angry. I do not blame anyone. I only know that today I have seen clearly who sees my son as a person and who sees him as a commodity. I turned to Mateo. Mateo, hijo. I stayed silent my entire life so you would not grow up on money. Today, I must speak, so you do not grow up ashamed of your own mother. Mateo's tears fell. He did not even try to hide them. I looked at the entire room and concluded. And to those who judged me by my old dress, I apologize for disappointing you. I am not poor. I am simply modest. And you have money. But you lack the one thing I have. Isabel hissed through her teeth. Lack what? I looked straight into her eyes. Dignity. The room erupted with gasps. Then applause thundered. Loud, overwhelming, like a summer storm crashing into Miami. Isabel shot up from her seat, the chair screeching across the floor. Laurent turned pale. Elodie faced the wall, unable to look at anyone. I set the microphone down on the table, not shaking, not regretting a word, because this was only the first blow, and they had no idea the next one would hurt even more. The applause still echoed as I stepped off the stage. Mateo hugged me, his face flushed with emotion, and Camilla stood behind him with trembling hands. She looked at me, then at her parents, then lowered her head as if wanting to disappear. Isabel was different. She stood rigid like a pillar of ice, her eyes filled with fury and panic, like a queen who had just been dethroned in her own palace. Laurent beside her tried to stay composed, but his trembling hands and wrinkled vest betrayed him. I assumed they would leave the event immediately, but no, they had not yet realized that their real humiliation was only beginning. The party was nearing its end. The host thanked both families. Hotel staff began placing the banquet bill on the VIP table. I sat at the nearby table, silent, just observing, not interfering, not speaking, only watching. Laurent picked up the bill. I saw the tension in his face, not because of the amount. The Devereaux family was wealthy. A party bill of several tens of thousands of dollars did not make them blink. But the pressure did. The eyes of the entire room were turning toward them. Laurent adjusted his collar, sighed, and pulled a card from his wallet, a gold card, thick, the kind carried by people who like to speak loudly about their finances. He placed the card on the payment tray and handed it to the server with a strained smile. For the family. I noticed the slight tremble at the corner of his mouth. Then, something no one expected happened. About 3 minutes later, the server came back, looking uneasy. "Excuse me, sir. Your card." It was declined. The entire Devereaux table froze. Isabel blinked rapidly, as if the nightmare began right then. "Impossible," Laurent said. "Try again." The server bowed and took the card to try once more. Elodie whispered something to her mother, her face suddenly pale. I stood from afar, my face calm, my heartbeat steady, not from satisfaction, but because I had seen this moment so many times. The moment when the most confident people crack under the weight of their own arrogance. A moment later, the server returned for the second time. His voice was soft but clear. "I am sorry, sir." It was declined again. Silence. A heavy silence that fell from the ceiling. Laurent stood up sharply. "This must be a mistake. It is a bank security block, not a real issue." But his voice trembled, and everyone heard it. Isabel leaned toward Camila and whispered, soft but still loud enough for me to hear. "C'est une honte." It is shameful. Camila's face went pale, tears welling in her eyes. Matteo turned toward me, as if wanting to apologize, on behalf of the entire world. Laurent handed over a second card, then a third, and then he pulled out another card, a silver metal one, and placed it on the tray. The server took it away. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, then, "Sir." This one was also declined. Isabel tightened her grip on the champagne glass until her hand turned white. Elodie looked away, covering her mouth. No one at the Devereaux table breathed. I took one step closer, not close enough to threaten, but close enough for them to hear clearly when I said softly, "These things happen to anyone. Banks make mistakes sometimes." Laurent looked at me with the eyes of a man who had just lost everything. "Do you have a card?" He was not asking. He was pleading. Isabel bit her lip. "You are not trying to show off after what happened earlier, are you?" I tilted my head and spoke quietly. "I do not need to show off. The truth shows itself." I decided to step in. I took out my wallet, an old leather one with worn edges. Isabel saw it and laughed with disdain. The cards in that wallet probably cannot help. I did not answer. I simply opened the wallet slowly, pulled out a card, and when the chandelier lights hit its surface, Isabel's expression shifted from mockery to pure shock. Laurent's mouth dropped slightly. Elodie nearly dropped her phone, because in my hand was an American Express Centurion card, the metal black card, reserved for the top 0.01% of the wealthy. I did not need to say anything. They knew. Very clearly. I placed the card on the payment tray and pushed it toward the server. Charge the entire bill, all of it, and tip generously. The server bowed. Yes, ma'am. Laurent stared at me as if his world had collapsed. Isabel whispered, Impossible. I looked at her gently, without challenge or venom. Is something wrong, Madame Devereux? Isabel's voice shook. You really have that card? I smiled. When you are an international executive director, banks tend to send you things like that. You do not even have to ask. Elodie stammered. But you live in Little Havana. I live where I feel peaceful, not where I need to display wealth. The card went through. It took 2 seconds. The server returned and placed the receipt before me. Everything is approved, ma'am. I nodded. Thank you. Laurent looked at the bill. Nearly $28,400, paid in an instant. Isabel's face was blazing red. Elodie's lips trembled. Camilla cried openly. As for me, I said only one sentence, the one that made the Devereux family bow their heads. You have misjudged the only woman in this room who never needed anyone to pay for her. I retrieved my card, placed it back into my old wallet, and walked out of the banquet hall, leaving behind 3 people clinging to the shattered remnants of their pride. But they did not know that the most painful part was yet to come, because after the party ended, when only the 2 families were left, all pretenses, all politeness, all European elegance would disappear completely. And at that moment, the banquet hall lights were out. Staff were clearing the tables. The clinking of dishes mingled with the sound of Miami beach waves outside the wide glass doors. Inside, the air was thick, as if something was cracking. Mateo pulled me aside. Mommy, are you all right? I placed a hand on his cheek. Of course I am. Are you? Mateo looked toward his future in-laws. Isabel's eyes were sharp as blades. Laurent stood stiff like a stone column. Elodie, with folded arms and a pale face, looked as if thinking, how could this happen to our family? Camila stood between them and Mateo, her eyes red, not knowing which side to lean toward. Her small shoulders trembled between 2 worlds. I understood. I had once stood exactly in that place between my family and the person I loved. That pain is always the sharpest. Laurent was the first to speak. No more French sophistication, no cool business composure, only confusion mixed with anger. You should not have done that. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. Isabel followed, her voice shrill though she tried to control it. Yes, you humiliated us. You made the whole room think we were uneducated. I looked directly at Isabel. I spoke only the truth. Isabel snapped her fingers in the air. But you did not need to say it at that moment, right in front of all the guests. Who reveals their monthly salary on a wedding stage? I smiled softly. I did not reveal my salary. I revealed the truth that all of you considered me beneath you. And I will not allow anyone to belittle me in front of my son. Isabel gritted her teeth. You were ashamed of your dress and you got angry and wanted revenge. Is that it? I looked into the eyes of the self-declared aristocrat, my voice low and unshaken. Isabel, I wore that dress because I wanted to see how people treat someone they think is poor. And you already answered. Elodie snapped. My mother was only trying to make sure my sister had a stable life. We meant no harm. Mateo stepped forward, his voice sharp and strong in a way I had never heard. No harm. You insulted my mother all night. No harm. You offered to pay my mother a stipend so she would disappear from my life. Elodie, do not say things you do not understand. Elodie froze. Isabel turned to Camilla, eyes blazing. Why are you standing there? Say something. Defend our family. Camilla burst into tears. I cannot defend something I know is wrong. Laurent barked. Camilla! But Camilla shouted. You were wrong. You insulted Mateo's mother all night when she did nothing wrong. I saw everything. Mateo turned to her, touching her shoulder gently. Camilla. She looked at me, her tear-filled eyes honest enough to break a heart. Mother, I am sorry. I am so sorry. I did not know my parents. I did not think they would. I pulled Camilla into my arms. She trembled like a child pulled between too many hands. I know, sweetheart, you did not do it. It is not your fault. Isabel saw it, saw her daughter crying in my arms, and that was when she accepted defeat. Not defeat to me, defeat to herself. I turned. I walked toward Isabel, slowly, not angrily, not aggressively. I stood close enough that she could not step back. I spoke very slowly. Isabel, a woman never stands with money. She stands with what is right. Isabel choked. Laurent tried to regain control. Mrs. Rivera, you may be wealthy, you may be accomplished, but that does not give you the right to disgrace us in front of our guests. I looked right at him. Laurent, I did not disgrace you. Your own behavior did that. I only brought the truth to light. Laurent tried to speak again, but Mateo cut him off. Enough! His voice echoed through the empty banquet hall, so strong it startled even Isabel. Mateo faced the family of his bride. No one treats my mother that way. No one. If anyone feels embarrassed, it is because they lowered themselves. Then he said a sentence that made my heart ache and swell at the same time. I have never been ashamed of my mother, but tonight, I was ashamed of the way you treated my future mother-in-law. Isabel burst into tears, not the tears of pain, but the tears of a shattered ego. Laurent stood still, lips trembling. Elodie looked down, unable to lift her head. Camilla clung to Mateo, crying silently. I placed a hand on Camilla's shoulder. You owe no one an apology, but your parents do. No one in the Devereaux family responded. No one dared. Isabel wiped her tears and looked at me with an expression completely changed. No more contempt, no more authority, only fragments. You You did not have to do all of that, I answered. No, I did not have to. I did it because you needed to see. The banquet hall no longer had music, luxury, or champagne. Only 4 French people standing in the Miami night, facing the rawest truth of their lives. And I knew that the confrontation was not the end. Because after the storm passes, there is always another conversation, not with Isabel or Laurent, but with Camila herself. 3 days later, after everything had settled, she would knock on my door, not in a glamorous gown, not wearing French perfume, but carrying sincerity, remorse, and a new sense of maturity. 3 days after that stormy night, Miami felt unusually calm. Sunlight poured over the rows of palm trees in Little Havana, and the wind drifted through the small balconies where neighbors hung pots of orchids. I was making coffee in my tiny kitchen when I heard a knock on the door. A soft knock. Very soft. The kind of knock from someone unsure whether they are welcome. I opened the door. Camilla stood there. No silk dress, no jewelry, no expensive French perfume, just a young woman with swollen eyes from crying, hair tied in a rush, wearing jeans and a simple white shirt. "Mother, may I come in?" Her voice was so small I had to step closer to hear it. "Of course, sweetheart, come in." Camilla stepped into the small apartment, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. There was no judgment in her eyes anymore, only confusion and gratitude. "Mother, I want to apologize, but not just for my parents." She sat down, her hands clasped tightly, her nails lightly scratching her palms. "Mother, I want to apologize for myself, too. I let them say all those things." I stood there and said nothing. I poured her a light Latino-style black coffee. Camila held the cup with both hands as if she were holding a safe place. I said nothing. I let her open her heart. Camila inhaled deeply. "Mother, did you know I was not born wealthy? My family was once very poor." I raised my eyebrows slightly, not out of shock, but because every person carries a buried story. Our house in Lyon used to be tiny. My father worked at the docks. My mother was a seamstress. We ate old bread from the bakery next door because they felt sorry for us and saved it for us at the end of the day. I sat across from her, listening to every word. Camila continued. "Then my father began earning more, a little more, then more again. And my mother started to change. She said poverty was the greatest shame of her life." Her voice trembled. "From the day we left the poor district, my mother taught us one thing. Never let anyone know you were once poor, and never let anyone pull you back there." Everything became a competition about who was richer, who was more elegant, who had more worth. My chest tightened. "Mother, I grew up terrified of being looked down on, terrified of being associated with the lower class. So when I saw you dressed simply, I knew you were not poor. Mateo spoke about you with pride, but I still let my mother's obsession influence me." I rested my hand on hers. "Camila, no one blames you. You were raised inside a fear that was never yours." Her tears fell, running down her young cheeks. "But that night, you shattered that fear." She tried to smile, but could not. "Mother, when you stood on that stage and said everything, I suddenly realized you were not a poor woman. But what shocked me most was not your money, I asked quietly. Then what? She looked at me, her eyes bright and awakened. It was the way you stood up for your dignity without shouting, without showing off, without tearing anyone down. I have never seen that in my mother. I realized being rich is not about money. Being rich is living confidently without needing to prove anything. I looked at her. The future daughter-in-law I once feared would be just like her family. But she was not. She was rising above it, breaking out of the shadow Isabel had cast over her entire life. Mother, I want to learn that, I asked. Learn what? Camilla placed her hand over her heart. Learn not to be afraid of being simple, not afraid of being ordinary, not afraid of people thinking I am not elegant enough. Learn to treat people kindly, no matter what they have. I smiled. You do not need me to teach you, Camila. You already have what you need. Camila shook her head. No, you have something I have never had. Peace. I want that for my family, for Mateo, and for the children I will have one day. I looked at her for a long moment and said, You have already taken a huge step. You came here. You faced the truth. That means you are stronger than your mother ever believed. Camila wiped her tears. Mother, I want to be someone you can be proud of. I promise you. I held her hands tightly. And I promise you, I will stand with you, not to judge, but to walk beside you. Camila leaned on my shoulder. For the first time, she was no longer the elegant French girl. She was a young woman trying to escape a cage called social class. We sat like that for a long time in my small apartment that had nothing luxurious except truth. I knew that after this conversation, not only Camila would change, Mateo would change, I would change, and the Devereaux family would be forced to look at themselves honestly. But before they could learn anything, the truth about Isabel and Laurent's own poverty had to be told fully. And that was when, 3 days after my conversation with Camila, I received an unexpected call from Isabel herself. Her voice was no longer icy like the night of the wedding, no longer sharp as a blade, no longer filled with the arrogance of someone used to standing above others. Her voice was tired, frayed, like a violin string stretched too long and finally snapped. Madame Rivera, could we speak for a moment? I was not surprised. After collapsing in front of her friends, after 3 nights of silence with her daughter, and after the story of the declined credit cards spread among the French relatives, Isabel was facing her greatest fear. People no longer believed her polished mask of elegance. We met at a small cafe on Ocean Drive. She arrived pale, wearing minimal makeup, her hair tied simply. Nothing like the glamorous woman from the banquet. Some people are only beautiful when rich. But Isabel was different. For the first time, she looked truly beautiful, not fake, not posing, not strained. We sat down. She stared at her coffee for a long time, unsure of where to begin. Finally, Isabel said, May I tell you a story I have never shared with anyone outside my family? I remained still. waiting. I grew up in poverty, poor, to the point I believe poverty was a hereditary disease. Her voice wavered slightly, but was not weak. My father was a dock laborer in Marseille. My mother washed clothes for wealthier families. We lived in a room that was never warm enough in winter and never bright enough in summer. I wore the same worn-out shoes for 3 years. She let out a soft laugh, one that hurt more than tears. I remember the day my mother told me, "Isabel, you must marry a rich man. It is the only way out of this life." She repeated it every day. It became doctrine. I nodded slightly. I understood. But I waited for her to go on. I met Laurent at 19, and the first thing I did was lie about where I came from. Isabel touched her purse gently, as if searching for something to hold. I said I was the daughter of a small business owner. I hid my past. I cut ties with my old world. I built a new version of myself, not because I wanted to, but because I had been taught that only rich people had value. Laurent walked into the cafe. I had no idea he would come. Isabel looked at him, then at me. I told Laurent that today we would tell you the truth. Laurent sat down across from me. He no longer had the posture of a French businessman. No arrogance left. Only an exhausted man who had worn heavy armor for too long. Laurent exhaled deeply. Isabel is right. We were once poor. I grew up on a small farm outside Lyon. We had no electricity for years. We ate dry bread and the cheapest cheese. He looked at me, his voice low. And when we began to earn money, we became something else. Something distorted. Isabel nodded. Distorted because we thought wealth meant superiority, and poverty meant defeat. Laurent continued. We promised ourselves our daughters would never know the smell of poverty, never be ashamed the way we were. Isabel looked straight at me. So, when I saw you living simply, I thought you were the past I had been running from my entire life. I stared back without blinking. And that is why you treated me poorly. Isabel did not defend herself. She did not lash out. She did not argue. She said one word. Yes. Laurent placed his hands on the table. Our arrogance was just fear. Fear of becoming people no one respected. Fear of being looked down on. Fear of being called lower class. Fear of seeing our younger selves again. Isabel added, and I feared Camila would be seen that way if she married into a family I believed was not equal. I placed my hand on the table. Fear does not give you the right to insult anyone. Isabel bowed her head. I know. And the worst part is, I passed that fear on to my daughter. Laurent looked at me with rare sincerity. Mrs. Rivera, that night, when you stood on the stage, I felt ashamed down to my bones. I replied, not because I told the truth. Laurent shook his head. No, because I realized I had underestimated someone far stronger than we are. I stayed silent. They were no longer the arrogant people from the wedding. They were two children from long ago, poor, belittled, taught by life that only wealth made them visible. Isabel spoke softly, her voice breaking. I'm sorry. You do not have to forgive me. But I needed to say it. I answered. An apology does not fix everything, but it is a beginning. Isabel nodded. Then, could you start over with us? Not as enemies, but as two families trying. I inhaled deeply and looked at both of them for a long time. Then I said, the only answer that was fair. I will keep my distance, I will be polite, I will be respectful, but I will never forget. Isabel closed her eyes. Laurent lowered his head. I added one more sentence, the one they needed to hear. But if Camilla changes, if Mateo changes, then the two of you can change, and if that happens, we will meet again in a different place, a place without arrogance, without fear. Isabel opened her eyes, for the first time looking at me, without defense, without fear. I want that. That evening, after meeting Isabel and Laurent, I returned to my small apartment. The Miami sky was already dark, the lights from the Cuban restaurants below painting warm golden streaks across my porch. I set my bag down, had not even removed my worn shoes, when I heard a knock at the door. A firm knock, steady, but not rushed. The knock of a man gathering every ounce of courage to say something he had buried for too long. I opened the door. Mateo stood there, his shirt wrinkled from work, hair messy, eyes red from lack of sleep. He was not smiling. He was not speaking. He just looked at me with the eyes of a son who finally understood who his mother truly was. "Mommy," he said, his voice hoarse, "may I come in?" I nodded. Mateo stepped inside, standing in the tiny living room where he used to sleep on the sofa as a child. Memories filled the air. He turned to me, and I knew. The moment I had waited for his entire life, the moment he would truly grow up, was right there. "Mother, I am sorry." Mateo said those words without excuses, without defensiveness, without weakness. "I am sorry for looking down on you. I am sorry for letting them say those things. And I am sorry that I was the first person afraid you were not of the right class." I did not answer immediately. I let him speak. I thought, if you dress simply, they would judge you. I was afraid people would think you were poor, afraid you would embarrass me. His voice cracked. "Mother, when you walked into that room in your old dress, all my childhood fears came back. Those days when you carried me on that old car that barely worked. Those days you had to choose between buying my medicine or buying fresh meat." Mateo took a deep breath. "I forgot that you chose simplicity, not because you were weak, but because you were stronger than all of us." I touched his hand lightly. "Mateo." But he kept talking. "Mother, I have never seen anyone as strong as you." His voice shook, but did not break. I thought, if I told them you worked in a small office, they would accept you more easily. If I told them you lived a modest life, they would not feel threatened. I thought, hiding things would protect you. He let out a bitter laugh. But I was wrong. So wrong. He sat down and held his face in his hands. "When I saw them belittle you, when they looked at you like trash, I wanted to scream, but I stayed still." Mateo lifted his head, tears at the edges of his eyes, but not falling. I stayed still because I was afraid that if I defended you, they would think you really were not good enough. I was afraid they would say, That is right. His mother is not on our level. He swallowed hard. Mommy, that is the worst thing I have ever done. I sat across from him and placed my hand on his cheek, the way I did when he was small. My son, I am not angry at you. Mateo shook his head. But you should be. I let them hurt you. I made you stand on a stage and defend yourself. At my own wedding, his voice broke. I should have been the one protecting you. I held his hands and said the thing he needed most. I took a deep breath, my voice low and steady. Hijo mío, you do not owe me perfection. You owe me growth. Mateo looked at me, his lips trembling, and that night I continued. You grew. You told your wife the truth. You set boundaries with her family. You did not let them keep insulting me. Mateo shook his head. But you should not have had to bear that, Mommy. I smiled softly and brushed his hair like I used to when he was 7. I have carried many things in my life, but the only thing I did not want to carry was my son's shame about his own mother. Mateo pulled me into a hug, holding me tightly. Mommy, I was never ashamed of you. I was ashamed of myself. I let him hold me. His arms were stronger than before, but the heart inside him felt like the same child running after me in the scorching Miami streets, the child I carried after long night shifts. Then Mateo said the sentence that changed everything. Mommy, I want to live like you. I blinked. Like me? Mateo nodded. I want to live without fear of what people think, not chasing money, not judging others by money, not letting luxury define my worth. He smiled softly. I want to live rich, but not rich like them, rich like you. I touched his cheek, feeling time fold back on itself. My son. That is what makes me most proud. Mateo left my apartment that night with a brighter face, a steadier step, and a lighter heart. But the story was not over. Because after every storm, there is always a dawn, a moment when everything becomes clearer, simpler, and truer than ever. And that was when I realized wealth is not something to keep. Wealth is something to share through truth, through kindness, through dignity. After my conversation with Mateo, I sat alone in my small apartment in Little Havana, watching the light from my neighbor's windows spill across the floor in long golden streaks. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat down on the old wooden chair I bought years ago at a flea market. The room was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. It had been a long time since I felt absolute peace. Not the peace of someone who won, not the peace of someone wealthy, but the peace of someone who finally spoke the truth and felt no regret. The next morning, I walked down the familiar street. The pastelito shops, the line of people waiting for Café Cubano, the elderly men playing dominoes in Maximo Gomez Park. Everything looked the same. No one knew how my life had changed the night before. No one knew a proud French family had collapsed under the weight of truth. And I liked it that way. Truth does not need an audience. Truth only needs to be lived. When I paused in front of the bakery, the vendor, Maribel, looked at me and said, Marisol, you look different this morning. Lighter than usual, I replied. Yesterday, I let go of a very heavy burden. She smiled. Good. A woman like you was not born to carry things for anyone. I smiled back and continued walking. That afternoon, I received a message from Camila. Mother, my parents want to meet you, not to argue. They want to say thank you. I was surprised, but not too surprised. People are strange. Only when they are humiliated in front of others do they finally face themselves. We met again. This time not in a luxurious hotel, not in a room full of chandeliers, but in a small park overlooking Biscayne Bay, where little boats floated gently on the water. Laurent spoke first. That night, you embarrassed us, but it was the kind of embarrassment we needed. Isabel nodded, her eyes calmer than before. I realized money cannot save me from the fear of poverty. Only kindness can save me from myself. I looked at them for a long moment. Isabel continued, using the voice of an ordinary woman for the first time. I am not asking for your forgiveness, but I am asking for a chance not to repeat that mistake again. I nodded. There is always a chance, as long as people know they are wrong. Laurent asked quietly, You do not hate us. I shook my head. Hate is for people who still carry wounds. I did not let you hurt me anymore. I only let you see yourselves. Isabel exhaled, the breath of someone finally releasing something. A week later, Mateo and Camila hosted a small gathering at my home. No big party, no expensive drinks, no silk dresses, just arroz con pollo I cooked, a few wooden chairs, and the ordinary conversations of an ordinary family. Laurent and Isabel came too, dressed simply, wearing fewer accessories, and speaking with far less need to impress anyone. When Camilla brought out dessert, Isabel stood and helped me bring more plates. She no longer acted like nobility. She no longer treated people like servants. She was simply a woman trying to repair something broken. As the gathering neared its end, Isabel touched my hand. Thank you for not giving up on us. My daughter is happy because she has you. And I know. It is a blessing for her to have a mother-in-law like you, I replied. I do not need anyone to call me a good mother-in-law. I only want Mateo and Camila to learn what took me a lifetime to understand. True wealth is not money. It is dignity. It is kindness. It is the way we look at others without bowing our heads and without raising our chins. Isabel smiled, and for the first time, it was a smile without arrogance. That night, after everyone left, Mateo hugged me for a long time. Mommy, because of you, I know what a real family is. I hugged my son and whispered into his ear, Hijo, family is not a place where people show off. It is a place where people learn to love each other. Mateo nodded, his eyes red but warm, and I understood. My story did not only save me, it saved an entire family, and it saved the next generation. In today's world, too many people try to prove they are rich. Too few try to prove they are kind. And I, a woman living simply in a small apartment, proved that the richest person is not the one with the most money. It is the one who does not need money to prove their worth. If you're here, listening to this in the middle of your busy life, leave a comment and let me know what city you're watching from. I want to know where our journeys intersect in this great American land. and prepare. Because the story I'm about to tell will change the way you look at a wedding, a family, and a person. If you believe that dignity is not in our wallets, but in how we treat each other, please share this video with someone who needs to hear that truth.